So, okay, yes, go ahead. Your question about the project.
So, exactly are we supposed to turn in? Well, obviously, all of our code and output, append the output. Then, how do you want us to share the files with you?
It should be all zipped up. Your entire project should be zipped up, and just like all the other projects with your output appended, and any output files also just keep them in there. Um, we will run it and look at the output in order to get, what the to make sure that it's actually creating that output anyway. Um,
Yeah,
there was nothing else that is ambiguous about what you should turn in, right?
well, that's it.
Okay. Okay, good. All right. Any other questions really quick? Everybody's good. Okay. So, first thing that I want to talk about is the quiz. Quiz that's out right now. Let's not talk about it. It's a bit of an awkward time to have the quiz, but I just wanted to just announce that, hey, just in case you missed it, it is open today and tomorrow. And you ask yourself, why did you do this? Why did you do this? This is a horrible time to have this quiz. And you're absolutely right. But I wanted to hopefully be able to have everybody's feedback done for this quiz by Thursday, so that on Thursday, if you got some bad feedback, you get the opportunity to meet with the tutor on Thursday and or meet with myself and get everything fixed for the final. Okay, I had to squeeze one more in there where we're doing some multi-value returning functions. We're doing some code traces similar to like this right here that we're going to do another one of. Um, and yeah, it's literally the last thing that we're doing and then the final. So
Like with the
along
multi-returning value returning function things, I want to draw right on my computer screen the arrows, but that doesn't work.
yes, yes. Drew brought up that point, and it was a great point. So bring that sort of stuff up. Well, I guess it's a little late now, right? But that it's different taking it on the computer because you really want to write it down on a piece of paper so that you can draw it out and trace through it. And so that's why I just doubled or even tripled the time for the quiz. I think this one I just made it an hour because I was like, yeah, there's a lot of looping in here. So I mean, because it's about loops and multi-value returning functions. Some people are going to want to write down the whole thing. Also, feel free to quickly print it out and then go through it. I don't know what your situation is at home, but gave you that extra time so that just in case you wanted to do something like that, you definitely have the time to do it now. But if anything like that is a problem, just let me know. Okay. So the next thing is I did drop the final exam review. Uh, wait, I forget. I feel like I just mentioned that I dropped the final exam review into Blackboard. It's not the final pass through it, but it's something that you can get started with. And this is it here. So we'll go through this really quick, just so that we can do a little bit of conversation about it. But we really don't have much to do today. We actually don't have anything to do this week. It's a study week and stuff like that. But we did miss out on that week. So this is all just for you guys to talk about any questions that come up or anything like that. Um, but to get us started, I did come up with another code trace that we can go through. So, unless somebody has any questions or anything that they want to talk about really quick, let's just get started and do this really quick. All right, so everybody's good?
Yep.
All right. So, right away in main, I see Val 1 and Val 2. So, I'll make my boxes here. will use red for my output and put it over here actually. So, okay, we're going to do our first cout statement right here. We're going to say cout val1 space val2. So we'll output 6 space 2. End line, so we're right here. And then we call function 1. So function 1, we see down here, we have an int 1 and an int 2. So we passed in val1 first, passed it by reference. So int 1 ends up pointing to val1. And then we passed val2 second by reference. So int 2 ends up pointing to val2. And then we say int 1 gets int 2 times 2. So 6 ends up turning into a 4. And then we do int 2 plus plus. So int 2, here this 2, turns into a 3. And then we are done inside this function. So we'll do our variable cleanup. And then we finished with this function. So we go and execute our next cout statement, which ends up outputting 4 space 3 and an end line. Next, we execute function 2. So function 2, we have an int 1 and an int 2. Now, we passed in val1, then val2. So if we look here, int 1 passed by reference points to val1. And then int 2 points to val2, just like before. But now this time, we're actually going to call function 1. So when we call function 1, we're passing in our arguments again. The exact same name, but that doesn't matter at all to C++. It's just a little more confusing of an example for that reason. So we pass int 1 as int 1 argument to our function. And that points to val1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to point this int 1 to that val1. And then same thing for our int 2. That gets passed second, which is int 2. So int 2 ends up pointing to the exact same thing, which is val2. Now, we're right here at this line, so we start executing, and int 1 gets int 2 times 2, so 4 turns into a 6, and then int 2 plus plus, so 3 turns to a 4, and now we are at the end of function 1, so we exit, and we are here inside of function 2, so let's clean up our variables from function 1. Good enough. Now we are done in function 2, so we're going to come back out here, and then we clean up our variables for that function as well. Now we do our next cout statement. So we cout val1 space val2, so that's a 6 space 4. And then here we are at function 3. So in function 3, we have int 1 and int 2. Now int 1 is passed by copy, so if we look here, val1, we end up passing a 6, so 6. Int 2 we pass by reference, and we pass val2, so int 2 ends up pointing right there. And none of that matters because we're just going to see out what's in int1 space int2. So we end up see outing 6 space 4 and an end line. Not a lot happened there, but we're done with the function. So we come back out. And then we clean up all of our variables. Now next, we call our cout. So we see out val1 space val2. Val1 is 6, val2 is 4, so 6 space 4 again. Now we are here at function 1 again. So function 1, we have int1 and int2, both of which are passed by reference. So let's get ready to link them up. And we passed val2 and val2. So both of these variables point to the exact same variable in main. So when we come in here, we say int1, 4, equals int2, 4 times 2. So 4 turns to 8. And then we do int2 plus plus. Well, int2 is right here. So 8 turns to 9. And then we are at the bottom of the function. So we are done. So we come back up and we're going to get ready to do that. But let's do our cleanup first. So we see out val1, 6, space val2, which is 9. 6 space 9. And we are done. Now, how's everybody feeling about these code traces? We've done a lot of them. Getting a little bit more comfortable with them?
I'd say so.
Good. Hopefully not too many of them, that I'm boring too many of you, but they're very helpful. They're very helpful. Okay, so this is all for the hands-on stuff. Now let's just talk about some stuff that's going to be on the final. Now, so this exam sheet just covers. It does go dip a little bit into the exam 2 content, which had some looping stuff in it, but ignore that. That there's a little bit of overlap, but it's not too crazy. But it is a cumulative exam, so make sure that you review exam sheet 1, exam sheet 2, and this one, just to make sure that you're getting the full picture. And just because it's not in here, it doesn't mean that there couldn't be a question on something else. Anything that's been covered in this class, is fair game. So, but I'm not trying to trick you. I'm just saying, right? So first of all, we have some terminology, right? MVRF. What is an MVRF versus an SVRF versus a void function? All things that should come to mind. By the way, as I'm going through this, just feel free to stop me if you're asking, like, well, what does that mean? What would you say that this means? Whatever, Now, passing by value versus passing by copy. So being able to define both of those and figure out what the difference is, of course. Not what the difference is, excuse me. They're synonymous. They're the same. But what is it? What's the difference between that and our next value, which is pass by reference? So how is pass by reference different? What is a count controlled loop? Are event driven loops? That's that whole topic which encompasses end of file loops, sentinel controlled loop, and flag controlled loops. And we didn't talk.
A little shaky.
Yep.
Like sentinel and flag controlled loops.
So remember, the Sentinel loop is like we had that one example where we looked at something that was adding up all the numbers in a file until it found the number -1. Remember, that was like we called that our Sentinel value. So we declared a constant, set it to -1, and we kept reading from the file until we found our Sentinel value, until we found that -1, right? And then we quit out of the loop. So that's a Sentinel controlled loop. To give another example, it would be you remember the example that we did where it was like an A or a B and it would print all those crazy characters to the screen. Well, it would just like print a whole bunch of characters to the screen. And then we would loop back and we would let me see if I still have that actually.
I kind of sorry. When I do the sentinel loops, I kind of think of like the sentinel value as like a kill command, kind of.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Okay. I don't have it.
Does it have to be a constant?
No, it doesn't necessarily have to be a constant, but remember, well, especially when we're talking about does it have to be? No, 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 no. It'll completely compile without it. Is it a good idea? Yeah, probably a good idea. Remember, if you have something that doesn't change, isn't likely to change, like your kill command, type Q to quit out of the program type of thing, that's a good example for when you want to use a Sentinel controlled loop. And you want to use a constant for that because, well, it's not something that's likely to change, but if you were to change it, it makes a lot of sense to have it declared as a constant. And it makes your code a lot more readable too, right? So the flag controlled loop is the next one, and this is not one that we generally went through, but it's controlled by a Boolean. So you could have something where, let's just say we're going back to the leap year program that we wrote, and we had a function that would return true or false if this is a leap year, right? Maybe you want the user to input a leap year. So the user inputs a year, you check if it's a leap year, and if it's not a leap year, you want to send them back through to, keep trying until they input it correctly. That would be a flag controlled loop because your loop is determined by a true or false flag, and that's it.
How was
So
how was it written? Because I know like the sentinel value one, you'd be like, you would put your test and then be like not equal to sentinel value, like to get into your loop.
Yep.
For the flag one, was how would you write that? Would be like not equal to, like is even or something?
No, you wouldn't have any sort of expression. You have really two options. The way that I would do it would be to write the function right there inside of your while. So it would be while is leap, and then you're passing in your integer in there. So it returns a true or a false right there.
Oh, okay, I get it now.
Oh, you'd have to not that, but you get the point, right?
Yeah.
So isn't a do while loop just inherently a flag controlled loop?
Well, I would argue it's more of a sentinel loop if you're like, let's say that you want to put a loop where the user has to input a Y or an N, right?
Yep.
So you're kind of looking out for those. Values, and those are your sentinel values that tell you when to stop looping, right? Because it's either this or this, but anything else we're going to continue looping. But what you'll notice, because I don't say definitively whether or not it is or it isn't, lots of these fall into multiple categories. You'll find that true for a lot of things in programming where you're like, well, is this a count controlled loop or is this I don't know, a sentinel loop? And it's like, well, things can be both things, right?
Mhm.
Do you remember when we did that going back to the sentinel value loop that we did where we were reading from a file and until we found the -1. I talked about that just a few minutes ago. We modified that because remember we had the issue where if there was not a -1 in the file, the whole thing would fall apart, right? Well, if we want to make that loop more correct, what we really want is an end of file / sentinel controlled loop, right? We either want to keep reading from the file until we hit the end of the file, or we hit the sentinel value. So you see, usually you want more of a blend. It's not really as clean as we show you,
Mhm.
Okay. Jacob, I believe this was your question that I went off the rails on. Did that answer it appropriately?
Yep.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
So next, going into concepts, we need to be able to identify all the parts and what they're called for the following types of loops. So, our count controlled, end of file, sentinel controlled, and flag controlled. Can you name all 4 parts of these? Uh, Most of them are the same, but be careful, end of file. So being able to write an end of file loop. So this is super important. I stress it in here. Uh, End of file loop is super important. You need to make sure that you know all the pieces, why all the pieces are there. Do not forget your priming read, for example. If you forget your priming read, none of it works. Okay. Ability to convert a count controlled while loop into a for loop. Pretty self-explanatory, right? Make sure that you know all the pieces of a for loop. Remember when you do a for and you do the open parentheses, you're doing like let me just open up something. Remember when you're doing your first thing that you put in here is your initialize LCV, and then semicolon, your loop test, and then semicolon, your modify LCV. And then your open curly brace, and then here is your loop body. So these are, well, the 3 pieces of the loop, and the 4th piece is the loop body. So this is a loop that goes from 0 to 9 and outputs the numbers. Okay, so able to convert from a while to a for, and conversely, able to convert from a for to a while loop. That may come up. How would you write a loop that outputs odd or even numbers in a given range? So if I asked you to output all odd numbers from 3 to 30, 3 to 31, let's say, how would you do that? Would you know how to do that? I say ability to trace any sort of loop, but ability to trace nested loops. So, for example, if you had the for loop and another loop inside that loop, would you know how to do the inner loop and then do the outer loop and then do the inner loop again and all that sort of tracing structure? Okay, so what loop structure would you use to validate user input? Anybody want to? Andrew, you just mentioned this. Yeah, do while. Probably make the most sense. I agree with that. So could you write a loop that validated the user input as a Y or an N character? the next, how do you pass by value, and how do you pass by reference? So what's the difference between those syntactically?
Ampersand.
Just the ampersand. Yep. And now how do we comment these parameters? Jacob just
In,
asked
out.
that. In, out, in, and out. Yep. Now, why do we document the parameters? I guess that was a really, really good question earlier because there it is. Now, and functionally, what's the difference between passing by value and passing by reference?
I guess it would just
One,
be. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
okay, the one passes a copy, which is the pass by reference, or the by value, and then the pass by reference, like, passes the memory location.
And what does the passing the memory location allow you to do?
Correctly modify the actual variable that lies in main.
Love it. Yep.
And you'd only want to pass by reference with a multi-value return function, right?
That is a good question. Uh,
Because you could just set the variable equal to the function return otherwise.
yeah, and that is definitely a thing that happens depending. Let me just say that for the context of this class, yeah, that's a fair thing to say. But you know how your teachers always lie to you because they're trying to simplify it?
Yes.
You know, like it happens all the time. I remember taking like biology, and you'd be like, "Well, I lied to you last semester, and let me tell you why." And then like, "Okay, cool. This is why I have trust issues." So if that would be the case here, like, yeah, no, there is no reason to pass by reference, but that's not entirely true, and we actually see that a little bit in this class because when you were passing your IF stream, your DN, right, or your for the project specifically, what did it make you do?
I wanted you to pass it by reference.
Yeah, yeah. So you have to pass that by reference, and we had touched on this very, very briefly when we were talking during one of our class periods, and we talked about because it has to do with how complicated that structure is, and because you have to pass it by reference because that variable, let's just say, has exclusive access to that file. Nothing else can open up that file. I don't know if you've ever noticed this before, but like if you have that file open and then you try to run your program and like it crashes because it can't open up the file, it gives you some error about like can't gain exclusive access to this file or something like that. If you haven't ran into it, then that's fine. You're unlike me. You're very observant to these things. Um, so it's
But
go on.
isn't that because fstream isn't really a variable and it's an object, which you can do certain things to
Yes.
its variables? Okay.
And since we didn't really talk about objects, I can't really go into that too much. But it just has to do with bigger things. Not only are there issues with we can't have two copies of things that are referencing the same file because that's just impossible in Windows, right? The other part of it is if you're copying a number is super easy for a computer to do, right? Copying some big object, to go into that a little bit more, that's like 5 megabytes in size. That's completely pointless to make a copy of when you would just pass it by reference, right?
Yeah, that's the point of the object, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, to pass it by reference, I wouldn't say that that's the point of it, but the point of it is,
to make reference to it rather than having to rebuild it every time.
yeah. Yeah. There are definitely reasons to make like deep copies of things and all that stuff, but it all comes down to basically there are some simple things that we can pass by value, And there are some things that are too complicated that we just can't pass by value.
Gotcha.
I hope that I answered that well enough to your liking.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. Okay, and then the last bit here. Able to efficiently trace code that is a mix of passing by argument and passing arguments by value and by reference. So basically just what we did today here. Can you do this? Was this easy for you? If so, then you're in good shape when it comes to that last concept. All right. So that's it for what I have planned for today. Let me tell you a little bit before we open it up to questions again. That Thursday, the plan is we're going to go over that quiz. So, 15, 20 minutes. It's not going to take that long. But we'll handle all the questions there. If there's any updates to this review sheet, I'll make sure to cover it there, and we'll have another conversation. We'll probably just go over the whole review sheet again just to make sure that everybody's got all their questions out. And then that's it. We're done. Well, you're not done. I'm done. You got to take the final. So, any questions for me? Everybody is good. Everybody knows all their homework that they have to do. Don't forget Lab 10 is due. Try to get your project in early if you can. It'll be just really helpful. Don't forget about the quiz. And don't forget about Lab 10.
And there's a worksheet, right?
Yeah, when was that due? I think that was already due, wasn't it?
No, I think it's due May 3rd.
Oh,
Yeah, it's on the 3rd.
man, I'm so nice to you guys. Yep, it is. Yep, you're right. Okay,